Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Steve Lazarevic. Have I got that right?
You've nailed it perfectly. You're like a native from Serbia.
Look, I'm fascinated and delighted to talk to you about this new product of yours, this invention.
Thank you.
Look, I think it's amazing. Now, I was talking to people about it earlier, but just to recap, it's an Australian invention. Am I right, Steve?
That's correct.
Did you invent it?
I partially invented it. Mr. Muhammad Ali Senegul was the main inventor. He was the one who initially invented the first part of the technology. I just developed a little bit more on top of it.
So what you do, you can take highly toxic soil and plastic and turn these commodities or products into bricks for use as building materials, and I understand that the experts are tipping your process to be a potential replacement for concrete.
That's correct. But there's probably a little bit more that I'd like to share with you and your listeners, if I could.
Yes, please.
The technology was initially developed to stop the migration of heavily contaminated soils. In Japan, with the Fukushima disaster, I think the Japanese government has nearly close to 120 million tonnes just sitting there. They don't know how to deal with it. And soil in its own right is very, very hard to deal with, as the perfect example of what took place here in Victoria with the Westgate Tunnel waste. And that was only a lightly contaminated soil of a Cat C category. So our technology was designed to encapsulate these heavily contaminated wastes from migrating into the food table, into the water table. That's poisoning the whole world.
Yeah.
In America right now, there's massive litigation, and I think it's the government of California who is suing 12 massive multinationals with the PFAS poisoning. Yeah. One of them was 3M, who just got penalised, I think, just over $10 billion to clean up their mess. This is a problem that's just getting worse and worse, and I know it's starting to make some news here in Australia. I know with some of the firefighters with the PFAS contamination. Now the Department of Defence has also acknowledged that with some of the issues around that, it's coming into our food table also. It's poisoning our water.
Now, PFAS is this byproduct from fire retardant or something like that, isn't it?
Well, it's one of them. Look, PFAS falls under a category of about 9,000 different chemicals, but it's technically called the forever chemical.
The forever chemical?
That's the name of it.
So it's accumulative and residual, and once you've got it, you can't get rid of it, until now.
Well, pretty much so. And once it's in the soil, so soil in its own right is very tricky. I know there are some known technologies that a few groups are using, but ultimately it is burning it, which also means we burn a very precious commodity, which is soil. So obviously the greenhouse footprint of burning this kind of waste. Then after you do burn it, there's probably a little bit more of some other waste in there. So it's not a genuine solution. I believe, and I know with the testing that we have taken place, and we've been developing this technology for the last 12 years, we have tested it extensively. From the United States, we followed the DOE guidelines. They approached a laboratory, another accredited laboratory that we were using here in Victoria, HRL in Mulgrave. They followed the guidelines to the T. With those guidelines and the success of the tests, we then took the results to ANSTO, which is the Australian Nuclear Science Technology Organisation in Lucas Heights.
Yeah.
They did extensive testing on it with radiation, and it's passed everything with flying colours.
Yeah, now, the thing, I'm casting my mind back when, oh golly, it must be 50 or 60 years when Australia was playing around with a thing called Synrock. They couldn't figure
Correct.
out what to do with nuclear waste, and they said, oh, well, there's this new product where you fuse or somehow embed your nuclear waste into this rock and it remains safe forever. But your product sounds a hell of a lot better, a hell of a lot more commercially useful.
Sure. So Stimrock sort of is committed towards an intermediate and high level waste, and predominantly that is dealt with governments and organisations like ANSTO are doing a wonderful job containing that, because if that beast was let out, God knows what would happen to our society.
Yeah, but your product can look after toxic soil,
Correct.
Plastics,
Sure. So
hydrocarbons, heavy metals. What's the list here? The industrial byproduct of products like PFAS, potentially low-grade radioactive waste as well.
correct.
You can tell me what the process is. You take all of this stuff and you convert it into what and how?
This is the amazing part of our technology. The polymer that has been invented by us and patented by us, once it gets to a certain temperature, we turn it into a liquid, we blend it into the waste, we mix it together, and we pour it. That's it.
And that's it. It's locked in. The toxicity is locked into the product that you've created out of this, well, rubbish.
Correct. It isolates the waste streams safely, which prevents the migration and the leaching of the waste streams back into our environment.
Now, first time I heard about it, it was about the production of, out of this material, you would make bricks, building bricks, I guess.
Sure. That's probably a little bit misguided. So I know how that perception came. So when we actually did a live demonstration at our testing laboratory, and we had some guests, one of the guests was the age. They actually physically saw the process. The process was we got thermally treated ash after they burned it to waste to energy ash. I also put our polymer in part of that blend, and one of the other bigger problems that the world is facing is plastic. Plastic is a very big problem right across the world.
Absolutely.
In our cities.
Yeah.
I also used 3 different types of plastic. So the first plastic was a commingled, untreated, and that's the magic word, untreated. We just ran it through a granulator. The granulator gave it to us in small beads, and you just see us pour it in. The second one was soft plastic. Now, in Australia, I know Red Cycle through Woolworths and Coles were storing all of their plastic bags. They got caught out. We used some of those plastic bags. And last but not least, we used ocean plastic as part of the filler.
Oh.
So all of that plastic was basically blended into a liquid, blended in with our polymer, solidified. And once it was poured into a brick. But if we wanted to make highway dividers, all it is just put a little bit more polymer through it, a stronger mixing process, and just pour it into a mold. So we're not limited to a brick. We're limited to limitations of what the building product can possibly be.
Any structure at all, by the sound of it. And would it be as strong as concrete? Is that what you're saying?
Sure. Probably to give you a little bit of clarification, so we're at about 3,000 psi. Concrete's at about 4,000 psi, up to 5,000. But the difference between my technology and concrete is concrete's porous. So eventually water seeps through the concrete and it attacks the metal. The metal inside concrete is the real strength. Concrete
cancer. And you see that in
Correct.
The few buildings, yeah?
Yes, correct. Where our technology is fully hydrophobic. So we work with the same way as concrete, but once our mixture is poured, water cannot get into it.
Uh-huh.
And based upon that, now the real strength of any building which is the metal, is fully protected. The moment there is metal inside your building product, the metal is somewhere up to, on high-rise buildings, is up to 300,000 psi. We fall under the same category. So technically the concrete, which is just there to protect the metal, we do the same thing, but our protection's a lot more efficient.
What about cost? Is your product more costly or less costly than concrete?
It's approximately about the same price as concrete, But the beautiful thing about our technology is it's fully recyclable. It doesn't have the issues of concrete. And it's environment friendly. I think with the new carbon taxes that are coming into the Western world, we will be a lot cheaper because concrete is considered one of the main perpetrators of the greenhouse gases.
Steve, do you think there's a public relations problem in the sense that people won't want to have things around them built out of toxicity?
Well, we wouldn't look, so there's certain levels of different waste. So we're not only limited to heavily contaminated waste. Heavily contaminated waste need to be stored into clean fill landfills, not into building products. We're not suggesting under any circumstances that we would get a heavy metal, hydrocarbon, PFAS, radioactive waste into a building. Under no circumstances are we suggesting that. We're suggesting to isolate them, to encapsulate them, and to put them safely and stop the migration of these wastes further into our environment.
Steve, Les Alicus here with Jeremy at the dining room table. Steve, when you say, and I think it's fantastic technology to isolate and quarantine these wastes, what happens, for example, we had a product called asbestos, as we all know, that in its form treated by human hand, it was fine, but the moment you start to rework it, there was all sorts of dramas attached to it. Now, your product, whilst you say it can be used for building or quarantining these wastes, what happens if there's let's say an explosion, a fire, or people will rework the product and then fibres and the contents are released into the atmosphere and into the human form? Is it completely safe?
So just to give you an example with asbestos, we don't create asbestos, we just isolate it and stop the spread of the asbestos. So that's the first part of it. With the use of it, if you were to use it as a building product, I think one of the biggest problem is, and we'll just use the example of concrete because it falls under the same category. When you drill it, it creates what they call silicosis, which goes into your lungs. Now it's becoming a problem. We don't have it because we're a polymer base. So with our test results that have been proven and tested, we came back at 20 parts per trillion, which basically means any waste in that matrix is fully encased. It's fully macerated. It's not released into the environment. Now, fire, unfortunately, is a different situation. But when you've got 70% waste inside your polymer, you can't burn that twice. It's non-flammable. The polymer will melt, but it will not have the same issues as certain different waste streams. Now, a perfect example is your backyard fence. People, say, oh, wonderful. And there's a reason why they say, don't burn your backyard fence. And you say, why? Well, because it's sprayed with arsenic. Arsenic is put onto the timber because you don't want the termites to eat it. But arsenic is a problematic hazardous waste. So it is in our environment, but there's a lot of smart people that set rules, regulations, EPA, building standards that probably think about all of these. Not all building products that we would suggest would be used as potentially exposed to fires. We can use it in piping underground. We can use it into manholes, highway dividers. We would focus towards more industrial, less home.
Now, Steve, I understand that it was November or December you staged the demonstration and you invited all sorts of major corporations to come along and have a look. BP, Coca-Cola, Visi, the wastewater giant, Veolia, or whatever it's called, military contractors as well. What was the reaction? What sort of feedback did you get?
Very strong. These people and these groups are specialists in the industry, and they know what problems they have and how they can apply this to some of their problems.
Yeah, here's the crunch question, I guess. What do you think the idea is worth?
Geez, well, here's a funny statistic. Just recently in The Guardian, I read that to deal with PFAS problems globally, considering how much we actually make, it's worth $17.5 trillion.
My God! Now you've got patents on this?
Yes, I do.
Everywhere? I mean,
most industrial nations.
Well, you see, that would cost you an awful lot of money up front anyway.
Yes.
Are you going to float the company, or are you going to keep it as a private company for yourselves?
Well, look, one of the things that I am focused on, and I'm sort of, as a proud Australian, it gives the people of Australia to really show and flex their muscles on the global stage. Now, this itself creates a whole range of opportunities for Australia and Australian people to have a presence right across the world. So there's a lot of smart people. There's going to be a lot more smarter people than me. All I know is a little bit about IP, but I'm sure we'll come across some very intelligent business people that will be advising us correctly on how the next steps take place.
What do you call the product? New World?
Geez, I tell you what, I haven't even thought about that. You know, we were focused on just fully encapsulating it, following what the waste streams do and how they work. We should actually, that's a great idea, and maybe some of your listeners can give us a couple of ideas. Love to hear them.
Well, and Steve, how advanced is your technology versus any competition who might be looking across your bow?
Sure. So probably the best way to describe it, so we were following the UK nuclear energy group, and for the last 40 years they've been looking for a synthetic polymer solution, and as Associated Professor Brad Cassells, who is an expert in the nuclear field, made a very strong comment when we were in Japan, and I know he did a presentation in India, and the remark was, I know the world's been looking for this answer for the last 40 years. These guys have found it. And I think that's a wonderful acknowledgement, especially, you know, someone like Professor Brad Cassells, explaining this to his nuclear colleagues.
Good badge of merit, Steve.
Steve, is this your first product, or have you pioneered other things in the past?
Well, look, the beautiful thing about polymer is it just opens up a whole avenue of different things. How we can change the world. As a synthetic and a waterproof concrete, it just opens up people's imagination on how you can deal with different forms of building in the ocean, in the desert. Because remember, we don't use water. We dry within a couple of hours. We don't use concrete.
Huh. Well, it sounds fascinating. Your company's called Pure New World.
Yes.
Pure New World. So if you do float it on the stock market, I guess that's what we've got to watch out for. It sounds like it's worth squillions.
It is. I hope it is. I hope it is for the benefit of our company and Australia.
Well, I think it's a brilliant idea. Steve, thank you very much for talking with us, and good luck. I don't think you need luck. Thank you very much. Sounds fascinating.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk on your station and your program.
It's a great pleasure, Steve. Steve Lazarevic. Steve Lazarevic.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.